So people have asked me, why did I decide to name our foundation Operation Underground Railroad? And there's a long story to that. The original Underground Railroad was a secret network of people of all colors and creeds who came together to rescue people who were enslaved. They did undercover operations. I mean, there were people like Levi Coffin, for example, who would pose as a slave catcher, and he'd get in with the other slave catchers and learn who they were looking for, and then he'd devise plans to throw them off the trail and then go back and help the fugitive slaves into safety. So it's one of the most inspiring stories of American history that I've ever studied.
We're trying to draw an analogy that's a powerful metaphor for what is going on today, the horrific institution of slavery. There is more human trafficking going on today, more modern day slavery than at any time in human history. I believe that Tim Ballard, his name will be remembered like other great names in the fight against human slavery. Why? Because human trafficking today represents millions and millions of more lives than ever in the history of our world.
So in the early to mid 2000s, there's 25 of us selected for a special task force that would be going into foreign countries looking for Americans who were trafficking children. And there was no manual for it. And this is when I started to buy every book I could on slavery. This is slavery. And the more I read, there's enough parallels that I recognized that if I could figure out what people in the 19th century did to extract and to liberate people in slavery and then care for them afterwards, I knew I could learn a lot. So I bought every book I could find. So I didn't just learn from the Underground Railroad about how to be inspired and how to rally people around a great cause. We actually learned tactics. We are now in Alexandria, Virginia, which was the front lines of the Civil War. Harriet Jacobs, who is a personal hero of mine, she was one of the founders of the O.U.R Hospital. It was a hospital for black Union soldiers. Here in this town also, Harriet Jacobs and others led efforts to educate fugitive slaves as they crossed into Union territory, and they took them and they fed them and they housed them. There were orphans, and Harriet Jacobs and others helped them find homes in the North. There is no rescue, there is no liberation if there's not a plan for longevity, a plan for restoration.
Harriet Tubman has always been my hero because I love the fact that there are people who saw so much beyond themselves, who saw and understood what freedom was all about, but they would go back and back again, taking the risk of being caught because they loved so much the idea of freedom and wanted other people to experience it. My great-great-grandfather, Silas Burgess, escaped to Texas, became an entrepreneur, owned 100 acres of farmland that he paid off in 2 years, built the first black church, the first black school up to 7th grade, was a pillar of his community, was loved by those around him, was a great father, and was known for being fiercely independent.
I wanted to tap into that power. I wanted to tap into the courage, the heroism, and the legacy of the original Underground Railroad and channel that light and that power and that influence into a new rescue mission.
We talk about how we didn't like the slavery of the 1800s. Let's do something about it in the 2000s and make sure that those look back on us, think about how we responded.
I can say honestly that were it not for the original Underground Railroad, there are children that we wouldn't have saved. That's how powerful that name is to us. That's how powerful that inspiration, that light, that legacy is to me personally and to our foundation. It was obvious to me that I had to use this name. And so we called ourselves Operation Underground Railroad.